So this week's comparison of two exercises is going to be seated dumbbell overhead press versus feet elevated pike push-ups. Surface level, these feel like extremely different movements, but if you start to break it down, it's pretty easy to understand, okay, both of these movements are vertical presses. It's very simple. They're both going to be targeting specifically the delts, but also the triceps, also the upper pecs to a degree, also a lot of like upper scapular trap muscles. But beyond that, it's really important to understand how these can actually apply to a program and where you might want to use one versus the other. So seated dumbbell overhead press is going to be awesome if you're really trying to consistently overload and progressively overload your delts. So I would not say that the dumbbell version is the absolute best. Maybe machine, barbell, something like that might be better if you're going for pure strength, pure overloading. But seated dumbbells are going to be a really great intermediary there to get a good amount of volume, good amount of intensity, freedom of movement, so you're not going to be restricted by a bar or machine. You're going to be able to slightly adjust your grip to whatever's most comfortable for you and also your mobility. And you're also going to get the stability of the seated position, which is not going to be provided by a lot of other overhead press movements. So that's also going to be super important to get right as well. So you'll see here, the bench is not perfectly 90 degrees. Perfectly 90-degree overhead presses are actually really not good, not advantageous. It's gonna put you in a bad position. So here, this is actually at a 75-degree angle, so it's a slight incline versus a straight up vertical overhead press. This is gonna allow for a little bit more of a natural arc, natural pressing position, and it's gonna be targeting the same move, or the same muscles, excuse me, as if you were super strict straight up, all right? Seated dumbbell overhead presses. Moving over to feet elevated pike push-up. Difference here is obviously going to be closed chain movement versus open chain movement. Body weight, so that's going to be pretty much the extent of how you're going to be loading this. So you can change the tempo, you can change the range of motion a little bit. If you want to elevate your hands and create a deficit, you can do so. You can shoot for more volume, more reps over time. But loading this movement, this push-up movement, is not going to be nearly as easy as loading and consistently overloading the dumbbell overhead press. That's pretty obvious there. But one thing that I really do love about the push-up here is that not only do you get that closed chain kind of like stability aspect that you do with any kind of other push-up movement, you get that like full body integration. So with the pike, you have to maintain ab control, you have to maintain pelvic control, your quads are contracted, you have to make sure your upper back is stable, but you're also getting a lot of actual shoulder mobility work as well. So as you press up, you're actually able to elevate your shoulder blades, elevate your scaps, almost in like a reverse shrug motion, versus the seated dumbbell overhead presses. If you were to do that, you're gonna lose a lot of stability. Not the case here with the feet elevated pike push-ups. So let's go ahead and demo these so we quickly can understand what the differences and similarities are. Most people are gonna understand what the seated dumbbell overhead press looks like. So first step is obviously to kick up the dumbbells. You wanna make sure that you have that stable base here and you have a good arch in your low back and your upper back is in contact with the bench. But notice here that I have the dumbbells at an angle. I'm not flared out like this. At a subtle angle here, which allows for more range of motion and more comfort at the shoulders. You're pressing and getting that full range of motion all the way at the top as well, all right? But it is important as well to note that you don't want to press and then reach. You're not reaching and shrugging at the top. You're keeping your shoulder blades down and your lats relatively rigid and stable, which will give you a lot of balance and stability throughout this movement as well. So whenever you're done, back down and back to the floor. Now, the feet elevated pike push-up. So for these, you wanna make sure that you have either push-up handles or dumbbells or something like that to where you can actually grip with a closed fist. You don't wanna have your hands flat on the floor. If you can avoid it, it's gonna put a lot of strain on your wrists. You also wanna have this bench 12, 18, potentially even a little bit taller inches high, because that's going to create that pike position and also gonna defer more of that load, that body weight into your upper body and force yourself to handle that versus if your feet were on the floor. So again, like I mentioned a second ago, if you want to increase the intensity, you can also elevate the handles. That will create a deficit, which will create more range of motion at the bottom. But here, Again, like with the dumbbell overhead presses, I like to have these at an angle. You want to keep your torso as vertical as possible. And don't pass out. That's big as well. So obviously, the feet elevated pike push-ups are gonna require a pretty substantial baseline strength versus the dumbbell overhead presses, which are kind of beginner friendly. Even if you're using 10-pound dumbbells, you can start over there. Not necessarily so with the push-up variation. So this is not nearly as scalable as the dumbbells are, which is important to note as well. But these are more portable. So if you're stuck at home, let's say that there is a worldwide virus and you can't really do anything else, feet elevated pike push-ups are a great way to replicate a shoulder-focused pressing movement, and seated dumbbell overhead presses are really great if you're looking for that intermediary strength, hypertrophy of the delts, and you also obviously have access to that. But both movements, great in their own ways. Just make sure that you have knowledge of the applications and you can usefully and intelligently apply those in your program.